I am Stephanie Jarrett. I am the mom behind Everything Arlington and DFW, and I'm a working mom of 3 daughters, married, and we live here in DFW. We're in the Arlington area, and I'm here today talking about the importance of wills and trusts.
I'm Jay Bailey, and I, for a few decades, have run the estate planning and probate section of the firm with Bailey and Gallion, and I am excited to publicize. We're always trying to get the word out so people don't have to make the same mistakes time and time again that are a little bit difficult to recover from sometimes. So I appreciate the invitation.
Yes. Okay. So I have 3 kids. I don't have little kids anymore. We've got teenagers and preteens at home, but my husband and I definitely, it's a topic for us right now because his mom is not doing well, and so we're dealing with all of her estate planning, and so it always brings us full circle back to what about our estate in the unlikely event that something happens to us. So talk to me about the importance of having a will in place.
Sure. And we talked a little bit before this about who your audience is, and so you always have to be careful. I talk about beware of the anecdote, right? Beware of the single story that you allow to define your decision making. So when I talk about estate planning, I'm talking about people who all their real estate for the most part is going to be in Texas. And then whether it's in North Texas or West Texas or another portion of the state's not that big a deal, but that's one of the things that's really misleading. When you go online and you read these stories and you get this advice, or maybe you turn on Channel 13 and there's a tall blonde woman in a sparkly vest giving advice, she's not giving Texas advice. She's giving advice for people across the country. So that's one of the things you do is when I have somebody on the phone, I'll say, okay, your name is such and such, and where do you live? And do you own any real estate outside the state of Texas? And we talk a little bit about the size of the estate, and we talk a little bit about kiddos. And maybe sometimes a child, whether an adult child or a minor child, will have some special needs. So I'll ask, is anybody on Social Security disability? Or does anybody receive Medicaid? You frame that to try to make sure that you're giving the right kind of advice to the folks that you're talking to. And the gist of it is, nobody that I know of gets up in the morning and says, I really want to contemplate my mortality. I want to think about being disabled because of an accident or an illness. And there are places that our minds won't go. For instance, I will preface when I talk to somebody about possibly losing someone in the next generation with, God forbid, we lost so-and-so. Now, for people out there, and there are plenty of people in this club, they have already lost a child or a grandchild. And so they know it's a possibility, but it's difficult. It's one of those difficult things to talk about. I don't like to go get my teeth cleaned, but at least when I do, they don't ask me about dying or disability. So in some ways, the dentist has got it over me in those conversations. So what happens? Well, if you're not ever going to die and you won't ever be disabled, don't do any estate planning. You've got it taken care of. But if you possibly could be disabled or incapacitated for a period of time, and there is a distinct possibility that all those cemeteries I've driven by would at least be some evidence of our mortality, then sit down with somebody that can do 3 things for you. Big picture. They can ask the right questions and then actually listen to your answers and actually listen to your questions. Secondly, they can actually draft the right documents. And thirdly, they can execute those documents properly. So what I run into about once a month, somebody brings documents into me, and they have been done pretty well. They were downloaded off of a website that said Texas-specific documents. Now, they didn't name an independent executor, and they don't have a self-proving affidavit. And sometimes they're not even executed to make them a legal will or legal powers of attorney. And so you want somebody that'll ask the right questions, listen to what you have to say, then draft the right documents and execute those so that you can put them in a safe place and not worry about them. And those documents are thrilling documents. Most every Texan needs a well-drafted will, statutory durable power of attorney for business and financial stuff, that's the general one, and then a statutory durable power of attorney for health care. And attached to that an advance directive to physicians so that you can keep a family member from being put in a really tough spot to have to make the call. We don't want our family members, even if they are doctors, to have to act like doctors if it has to do with an end-of-life decision for us. So there's some rambling. What do you take from that rambling?
Well, okay, so I've got some questions for you. Okay, so the first question is, if I'm going to come in and I need a will and I've got kids and we own a house, we've got, some 401ks, that kind of stuff, what do I need to bring to an appointment to get a will done? And what kind of questions do I kind of need to ask myself before I walk in to see you?
The main thing you need to bring is your phone. Now, I've practiced for a long, long time, so that didn't used to be the answer. But now the answer is you need to bring your phone. The reason for that is you're going to name some folks in fiduciary or special relationships to be responsible grown-ups. And you need to know not only how to spell their name, but you also need to know their address and their cell phone number for some of the documents. As far as what you need to know about your finances, even your question is really wonderful to ask various sections of it. One of the things we love about doing a will is that it captures everything. If I leave Mrs. Bailey 100% of my estate, it doesn't really matter where I'm living or what I'm driving or who I'm banking with or whether I finally make it on Star Search or Who Wants to Be a Millionaire or Jeopardy, or it won't matter what my assets are or my liabilities are. It's all going to go to my spouse. Now, if she's gone, it may go to my children. If they're gone, in my case, I have 7 grandchildren. So we think about that generation. If one of those, and your case is the same as mine, in order for your grandchildren one of these days to inherit, you probably have to have you and your spouse and one of your daughters pass. So that's a long way down the road for you. But the beauty of the will is I can plan for that. My will captured my estate that might have belonged to one of my daughters going to my grandchildren before I even had grandchildren, because those contingencies can be built in. Another thing that's important is to remember the world is broken down, it's bifurcated, right? Lots of ways. One of the ways that it's split up is probate assets and non-probate assets. So if you picture the state of Texas, and for some of you that's very difficult because you're not geography geeks, but the rivers, 3 of the rivers that flow into the Gulf of Mexico are the Rio Grande, the Sabine, and the Brazos, okay? Now, Mrs. Bailey receives all the water from all 3 of those rivers. She's the Gulf of Mexico. I hope that's a complimentary term, but it's an illustrative, it illustrates a point anyway. Right. So what happens is she gets my half of the house because I left her everything in my will. She gets, if I have life insurance, she gets that through another source. It's a non-probate source. She's the beneficiary on that life insurance policy. She gets the money in a certain account, a brokerage account or a bank account, because she's listed as the beneficiary. So we don't expect that the will, if all the beneficiary clauses are done just right, we won't expect the will to deliver all our assets because some of those are going to go outside of probate. One of the things that we like about the will, though, is it catches our mistakes. Let's say we listed the 2 of us and we were the only 2 on an account. Now we both die. What happens to that money? It becomes part of my probate estate, and it's delivered, in my case, to our children based on our will. The other thing that's important about that will is not just, okay, who gets my stuff, it's who's going to be in charge. Who do I know and trust? And again, you don't know how long people are going to live or if they're going to have their mental faculties, etc. But I trust, let's say, my spouse initially. Maybe my children aren't old enough to be in that position. Maybe I have a family member, a sibling, or somebody like that, and then we go usually 3 deep in the independent executor role. And then we've got further down the line, well, what if my underage kids, and by the way, a child is legally an adult before I want to hand them any cash. So we usually set a baseline at 25, somewhere between 25 and 30. If that's going to happen, then that means my wife and I are both gone and one of our children is gone in order for a minor child or a child that hasn't had 25 birthdays to receive from us. Well, in that case, then I want to make sure I can name somebody that's not in that line. And that can be a little bit tricky. In our case, Aunt so-and-so is the trustee for nieces and nephews, and Aunt so-and-so is the trustee for nieces and nephews. If my wife and I were both gone, and one of our children was gone, and it was before that deceased child's children, if they hadn't had enough birthdays. So, big picture, I want to make sure my stuff goes where I want it to go, and I want to put people in charge that I trust. So that's a lot. And it's amazing I'd be that enthralled with it, actually. But anyway.
Well, it's very confusing, if you're not in that line of work. For most of us that are not, it's like, well, I know I need one. But so now, kind of on the flip side, tell me what happens if something happens to my husband and I, and we don't have a will in place, and I've got 3 minor kids. What happens then?
Well, we find ourselves, it's called an intestate situation. It's a place where you need to hire an attorney to go to court to prove the identity of the heirs of the person that passed away. That involves not only the attorney that you hire, but also another attorney that's appointed, called an ad litem, or an attorney for the purposes of the litigation. And you have to have 2 witnesses that will come and testify that they knew this deceased person, they knew them well enough to know that they were married to this person, that they had these children, et cetera, et cetera. So I talk about, if you know that once around a standard track in modern times is 400 meters, then it turns the 400 meters into the 400 meter hurdles almost immediately, and that's if everything goes well. Many families are blended families. And so I get the response from somebody when I say, well, because nobody made any plans, then actually your late husband's estate goes to his children from a previous relationship. That's not always the best news anybody ever heard, but there's a very simple cure for it. You can tell the world legally who you want to have your stuff and who you want to put in charge. But an intestate succession case is, I would say, probably 5 times more difficult than dealing with somebody that, and sometimes it's almost impossible. Case in point, you've left people that have to sign off on things, and possibly they've lost their mental faculties. Possibly they're imprisoned or in a state hospital, or they're just gone. And sometimes we can't find people, and it stops everything. Case in point, you don't want to buy a house where almost everybody has signed off on the paperwork, right? Mm-hmm. And so you can have an intestate succession case where you've got a lovely home that can't be sold because there's one person that we can't find that needs to sign off on this. So the quick answer is, if you die without having done the right paperwork, it's a mess. So we don't like messes.
Right. So, but is this something that, everybody needs this, right? This isn't just if you have massive wealth, or if I've got 6 properties, or,
In Texas, now you grew up in Chicagoland.
Yes.
And I actually grew up in a home where they spoke English. I don't always speak English, but I try to emulate my folks. In Texas, what you say is, I don't need estate planning because I ain't got nothing. Well, forget the double negative. You actually do have something. And you might have something, let's say I had $5 million estate, and I didn't do the paperwork, and now it's going to cost 10 grand to clean up after me. If I got $5 million, spending 10 grand to clean up after me isn't that big a deal. What if I have the average estate? It's a few $100,000 or maybe $1 million. And now somebody's having to come up with 10 grand to tidy up after me when they shouldn't have had to. That gets to be significant. I have this case at least every few weeks. Mr. Bailey, we were fixing to do, another great Texas statement, we were fixing to do some estate planning, or very, very sad, we didn't have time, or we didn't expect my loved one to pass away. And so all we've got is a bank account that has a few $1,000s in it. And they're telling us that we've got to go to court, and we've got it. And I said, I'm so sorry, but they're right. You're going to have to gather a few $1,000s to hire an attorney to go get a few $1,000s out of this bank account. And so the people that, when you say estate, people think, well, tear a plantation from Gone with the Wind, right? Well, no, I don't even have a lot of stuff. But you have enough stuff so that you'd like it to be as inexpensive and efficient to clean up after you as is possible. So the other thing is, you don't know for sure what you have and what you don't have. Let's say I'm killed in an automobile accident. I look both ways, like you always should in the Metroplex. My goodness, you never hit the accelerator when the light turns green. You look both ways, yes. You wheel out, but somebody T-bones you and kills you in an accident. Well, there's litigation involved in that. Who has the authority to handle that litigation? Who's going to deal with your insurance company on totaling out the car? Perhaps my loved one thinks that you wrongfully killing her husband was going to be inconvenient for her. And so, but the problem is you've not done any documents. There isn't anybody that's presumptively in charge. And we don't live in little towns anymore where everybody knows that Bill's married to Susan. Everybody knows that Bill and Susan have those 4 kids. That's not how it works. You get to do lots of court work, and you get to spend lots of money and lots of time and lots of frustration. And I got to tell you, we're walking through that right now. We lost somebody really important in our lives, and it's wonderful. We're excited that he's no longer, limited by a body that was his prison, basically. And we are very excited about the heritage that we've received from him. But the reality is, it's difficult. And why would you, by lack of planning, make it even more difficult on your family members? I use this example, an advance directive to physicians I call the blame dad document. I don't want anybody to go home from the hospital at some point saying, well, I had to make the decision for dad to go on and be in the next place, which we all fervently hope is better. They don't have to guess what I want. They don't have to draw straws or flip a coin or wait to see who's not completely dysfunctional based on the circumstances. That advance directive to physicians says in black and white, no, this is what I want. And so blame me. If you got a house full of girls, it's a good idea. Dad already gets blamed for most things. Whenever mom's not being blamed, dad is. And so go ahead and get that document in place, and that way alleviate one big, why would I want anybody that I care about to go home from the hospital saying, I had to tell them to discontinue life support on my dad? They don't have to. I've got paperwork in place to take care of that.
So what is it, I think one of the barriers to people having a will in place is the cost. What does
Sure.
it look like for an average family to come in and have those documents drawn up?
I help people shop sometimes because I think they should. I will talk about, first of all, understand what you're getting, right? So it's like buying a car. Sometimes I've even showed up in the dealership and found out, well, yeah, I really need AC and I really don't like to crank windows anymore. So I wish that I had known before I got here that this was the price point. I think you should expect for a couple, most every one of us is going to need a well-drafted will a statutory durable power of attorney for business and finance, that's the general power of attorney, a statutory durable power of attorney for healthcare, and an advance directive to physicians. Now, most of us, if we have kiddos or grandkids, will also need some contingent testamentary trust language in that document. The what ifs, what if a beneficiary is 18 and they're receiving a chunk of my estate? I don't want that. I want that to go to an adult to supervise it. That package, on the low end, you might be able to get that for $1,000 for a couple. On the high end, probably a couple of thousand. I would expect to spend $1,200 to $1,500 probably for it. If it's drafted correctly, it should cover a decade or two of your life. Some very important exceptions to that. If you set yours up like I have, my spouse is my starter at every position. She's my first chair, she's my starter, and so if I lost my wife, I wouldn't have to hurry to do new estate planning documents, but I would want to be aware of the fact that I lost my number one executor, my number one beneficiary, my number one power of attorney on each of those. And so I tell people this should last you 20 years with this caveat. First of all, you're going to stay in Texas, because if you move to another place, I need you to go in and talk to somebody that knows the law there. Death, disability, divorce, those are all things that can really change my plan. And so it's not going to last 20 years if, God forbid, you have a significant death in your family and you go through a divorce and somebody becomes incapacitated. But if everybody stays healthy and married, you can probably spend $1,500 every couple of decades and do okay with it. There are always the exceptions to the rule, right? There are always the people that are higher maintenance, and it doesn't mean they're not great people, but they got lots of stuff going on. Sometimes we have to tweak things a little more frequently. Let me talk about trusts momentarily.
Yes. I hear them interchangeably all the time.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. One of the things that happens to us in Texas is people are getting global information, right? And so trusts, which are a concept that goes back at least as far as the 1500s, where people needed to hold things, the guys, the brothers, the friars, had great winemaking, they had vineyards, they had libraries, they were the best beer makers in the world. And so they said, we've taken a vow of poverty, we can't own this stuff, and we certainly can't pass it on to our kids, because we're really not supposed to have kids. And so they said, we'll put together this idea of a trust. And so now the brothers' trust owns the vineyards or the brewery or the library. So a trust is a little legal entity. Think corporation or limited liability company or something like that. And it's a legal entity that holds things. So, for instance, this is not the case for me here in Texas, because I don't find it to be advantageous. But in many, many, many jurisdictions, you don't want a will and powers of attorney and advance directive. You want to try to build and then transfer as many assets into the trust as you can, or sometimes more than one trust, and then have what's called a pour-over will to catch the stuff you couldn't have poured in there. I ask people, why do they have toothbrushes at the hotel? Well, because people forget their toothbrushes. So you think you've transferred all your assets into this trust, but an investment check comes, you get a medical reimbursement check that comes, you have an accident, an illness, you have a prolonged disability, so you need extra stuff. So when you hear this information, it's like, you need rust protection for your car. Well, if you live in a suburb of Chicago, I would agree, you do. If you live in Arlington, Texas, I'm not a mechanic, I'm not even much of a wrench, but I would say you probably don't. So depending on where you are and what your assets are and what your liabilities are, you're going to have different needs as far as estate planning. Trusts are wonderful. We do lots of contingent trust and lots of testamentary trust. We don't do a whole bunch of inter vivos or living trust, because most of our clients, their real estate's in Texas, they don't have massive estates, and there's not really a huge benefit for it in their family situation. So it's one of those words that can be very confusing because trusts come in various shapes and sizes. They may be exactly what you need, and they may not be something that you need at all.
So you'd recommend for somebody like me, somebody like my family, we need a will, maybe a trust, depending once you get to know us more, but
no, that's
definitely
a great example. We talk, and then I identify, and every once in a while I identify something, and I say, I've got to refer you out. If you own a lot of property in a foreign country, for instance, I can't really represent you knowingly because I just don't have the information. If sometimes there are special family situations, and we have to do some things that are a little more sophisticated. You and your spouse, we presume you're both citizens of the United States, have a $30 million exemption from estate taxes, federal estate taxes. So we're not overly concerned with most of our clients that they're going to wake up tomorrow and go, oh no, we've got $30,500,000 worth of estate assets. So there are a lot of those things that you get out ahead of. And then sometimes we come across things and I can't do what the client wants me to do. Sometimes I can't do what the client wants me to do because in doing this for the better part of 40 years, I just think it's a really bad idea. And I have to, unlike if I were selling you that car and trying to get you to buy the warranty, I have to tell you what I think is in your best interest because I am a fiduciary. I have a special relationship with you. So go sit down with somebody that knows what they're doing, have them ask the right questions, listen to their answers, and then hope they can listen to some of your concerns, and then they'll point you in the right direction.
How long does an appointment normally last when you come set up a will?
I book them for an hour, but generally speaking, as you've noticed, if I don't talk too much, then, because I'm genuinely interested, one of the reasons I like my job is I'm genuinely interested in where you're from and your kids and what you do and where you've been. And I wouldn't ask a young person like you, but I'll ask people that are vintage like I am, where have you traveled? If you're in the service, where was your favorite place that you were stationed? And that's not because I'm trying to sell them on something, that's because I'm genuinely interested. And a lot of times if you give somebody time, they will share information with you. On numerous occasions, I have paused as I was writing notes, and I'd have one of them say to the other one, should we tell him about Jenny? And I'll just write my notes. And pretty soon they're sharing about Jenny. Because one of the things your doctor and your lawyer and your rabbi and your parish priest and your pastor and your imam, one of the things they should bring to the table is they're not going to be surprised that you're a human being, and they're not going to be surprised that you're broken, and they're not going to be surprised that not everybody in the family is doing super well all the time. And those are important conversations to have and valuable to try to troubleshoot some things down the line. I'm Jay Bailey with Bailey and Gallion. Enjoyed our conversation, which unfortunately sounds like an old man lecturing, but I've enjoyed the opportunity to talk to you about this.
Yes, and I'm Stephanie Jarrett with Everything Arlington and DFW, and I'm glad I got to hear about this and learn more about this because it's definitely something that's important to me and my family and should be important to all families to protect their legacy.